Welcome back to Pound for Pound ATL.
It's Pound for Pound ATL.
What's going on, football fans? It's me, J.R. Clark, back again with another rendition of the Pound for Pound ATL. Today we're going to be talking about the defensive line, but before we get into that, I got to put a real big shout out to my main man, Toby D. He held it down on these last two videos that I have put out on the channel, the series that he did on the defensive backs, whether it be the cornerbacks, and then focusing specifically on the big nickel for the safeties. If you hadn't had a chance to go watch those, I highly recommend him. He did a very good job of breaking down what this secondary could look like in 2020. And his videos really influence the video that I'm making today, because I believe that the big nickel could be such a factor going into the 2020 season that it's going to have a big influence on what the front seven does and the types of coverages and stuff that Raheem Morris is going to run. But so if you haven't seen those videos, stop what you're doing right now, go check those out, because those are definitely worth your time. Toby D did a fantastic job on that. And another little thing that I want to throw out there is we really appreciate all the love and support that y'all have shown us as far as the comments and the shares and the likes and the views. All that stuff has been really awesome. If you're first time to this channel, I highly recommend that you subscribe, hit that little notification button so that you can get notified when we put out stuff, because we really enjoy interacting with y'all, and we try to bring forth a positive positive light to the Falcons organization from a fan perspective, obviously. So anyway, without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump on into talking about this defensive line. This 2020 defensive line is shaping up to be much different and much more interesting than the 2019 defensive line. The 2019 defensive line started off rough. They weren't helped by the crazy 5-2 formation that Dan Quinn decided to run as his base and his nickel, it seemed like. I went back and watched that just to make sure that I wasn't having some kind of weird bias. And man, that formation just did not do the defensive line or the front seven any favors, really. It left too much of the middle of the field open. And it was just way too predictable. And so I think that's what you saw in the second half of the season. You saw the predictability kind of go away some. They went back to more of a base 4-3 in a more typical like cover 2 type scheme. Through that, they were able to mix up a lot of the coverages and bring some different looks, in a sense, that they just didn't have in the first half of the season. Last year, the first half of the season, man, it was like lining up the same way, almost play in and play out. And it was just absolutely maddening. I mean, your 4-3 base was, it was Grady Jarrett at the 3 tech, Tyler Davidson. This is the 5-2. I said 4-3. Excuse me, I'm wrong. The 5-2, it was Grady Jarrett, Tyler Davidson, and Alan Bailey in the middle, right, acting almost like a 3-4, right? And then you had Vic Beasley and Takk McKinley on the outside standing up rushing. And there wasn't enough coverage or whatever in the middle of the field by taking a linebacker off. It was just a weird formation that just didn't produce the way Dan Quinn thought it was going to produce. So thankfully enough, by the bye, they got rid of it. They brought in, they moved Raheem Morris back to the defensive side of the ball. And one of the first things that Raheem Morris did that I noticed was put us back in a more standard 4-3. And, after the bye, his base really was, Tyler Davidson at nose, Grady at 3 tech, and then Takk McKinley and Vic Beasley at your respective 5 techs or 9 tech, depending on where they lined up, but defensive ends rather, and not more times than not, you had, Takk McKinley as the strong side defensive end and Vic Beasley as your weak side defensive end. So that was what it was, after the bye, and that tended to work a lot better for the team in general. And after that, they did, like in sub packages, they did mix in, Adrian Claiborne and Jack Crawford, but those guys, they mix them in very sparingly, and they mix them in mainly as in that 3-techs, right? So that got me thinking about what is the defensive line and the defensive rotation going to look like in 2020. And I had, I was sitting there looking at our roster, looking at the things that we did last year, and was really confused is not the right word, but was really scratching my head about where all these pieces are going to fit, because you have a lot of pieces that can do multiple things and can play multiple roles, very versatile as far as our defense is concerned, even with some of the guys that we have drafted. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich deploys the defense this year, especially with the news that came out of signing Deone Bucannon, the former first rounder from the Arizona Cardinals, who played a hybrid linebacker safety. I mean, that gives even more credence to possibly running a big nickel, which, influences the front seven, because now you're possibly talking about running mainly 2 linebackers in Foye Oluokun and Deion Jones as your 2 primary linebackers. Now, I was real worried about, our linebacker depth, but with the addition of Deone Bucannon, it's eased up, quite a bit as far as the depth. Now, if somebody like a Foye Oluokun or Deion Jones goes down, you're not necessarily relying on Leroy Reynolds or Edmund Robinson as being a full-time starter. Like, I like those guys, but I like those guys on special teams and as a possible reserve, not as a starter, right? So, it also, of course, depends on how quick Michael Walker gets brought up to speed. So, I want to take a crack at what I think the 4-3 base in 2020 is going to look like, right? I think you're going to have Tyler Davidson as your nose. You re-signed him. Obviously, they like what they saw in him as a run stuffer, as being able to control his gaps, not being easily moved. So, I think you're going to see him in your base packages lined up next to Grady Jarrett as your middle of the defensive line. Now, this is where it's going to kind of get a little interesting. I think in your base package, I think you're going to have on the strong side is Alan Bailey, and the weak side, John Cominsky. So I think your defensive line is going to be Tyler Davidson, Grady Jarrett, Alan Bailey, and John Cominsky. Now, look, keep in mind that this is all before like any kind of roster is set. We haven't had any cut down. We're not even in the camp. So you could call this way too early predictions if you want. But that defensive base there. And if I could find the clip that DQ had said, wanting to play John Cominsky more as a defensive tackle and a 3-tech, I'll throw that out here in just a minute.
So yeah, we'll play him as a first and second down defensive end, and then on some third down scenarios, definitely work him inside.
I think that 4-3 base presents you with strong run stopping capabilities, and then it throws in some pass rushing capabilities with Cominsky and obviously Grady Jarrett. Alan Bailey is a good, solid player. He doesn't bring much to the table as far as pass rush is concerned, and neither does Tyler Davidson. Obviously, he's more of just lane clogging, run stuffing nose tackle. So now a 4-3 nickel, which you're going to see a lot because the whole league runs nickel about 60% of the time, right? Because they have to combat the extra wide receivers. So I think your 4-3 nickel is really going, I honestly believe, at least to the start of the season, is going to be like a Grady Jarrett and either Alan Bailey or John Cominsky. Now, as the season goes on, or depending on how training camp comes out or shakes out, it could be Marlon Davidson starting next to Grady Jarrett. Now, I would like to see that, that would validate for sure the second round status, but they may not feel he's ready depending on how this training camp and stuff goes, especially with all this COVID-19 stuff going on right now. They're not able to do their normal off season. So anyway, you're going to have Grady Jarrett and either a mix of Cominsky, Bailey, or Davidson next to him. And then you're going to have, I think this is where you're going to see Dante Fowler and Mckinley come in a lot more. Obviously, your linebackers will be Deion Jones and Foye Oluokun, because I believe in the nickel, honestly, I think that's when we're going to be running more of a big nickel. So I think that's when you're going to see, the likes of Ricardo Allen, DeMonte Casey, and Keon O'Neal, as being the guys behind them. So anyway, that's what I feel like the nickel packages are going to be. That's where you're going to get the vast majority of your pass rush from guys like Mckinley and Dante Fowler, and obviously Grady Jarrett. I mean, Grady Jarrett was on his way to easily double-digit sacks last year if you didn't have some of those bogus penalties called on him, right? Now, one of the interesting things that they could pull out is, something that Dan Quinn likes to use, and I saw Raheem Morris use it a few times last year when he took over, was more of like a NASCAR package. And I think in your NASCAR package, you're definitely going to have, a Grady Jarrett, a John Cominsky, or Marlon Davidson, depending on if he shows some pass rush chops. But I would put that in as, John Cominsky, Dante Fowler, Mckinley, and then maybe even somebody like a Steven Means, right? Because I really think that John Cominsky is going to take over as your Adrian Claiborne role, with being able to move inside and outside, right? And that was the thing that Dan Quinn alluded to in that press conference, is they feel like that they could do more of that. And then also with a guy like Michael Walker in a NASCAR package, like you take off one of the safeties that you're using in a big nickel and bring Michael Walker back out on the field. He spent a good bit of time rushing the passer when he was in college, right, as a defensive end. So you can use him in a lot of ways that you use Devondre Campbell, right? That's one of the things that Devondre Campbell did quite a bit once Raheem Morris took over. When he was on the field, a lot of times he got used as either a blitzer or to cover a tight end. And that's something that if you go back and watch my Michael Walker breakdown, that's something that I alluded to there. So, needless to say, I think the NASCAR package could be something that we see more of, especially depending on, I think the linchpins of this defensive line and this defensive line rotation are going to be the play of John Cominsky and Marlon Davidson. If those two guys, Cominsky, if he makes a leap, and if Marlon Davidson shows up in a big way, I think that it's something that can produce big time for this team. Now, Dan Quinn really likes his defensive line rotation. Okay, so the top defensive guys, and you may be thinking, okay, JR, why haven't you mentioned some of these guys? I think your top defensive line rotation is at nose tackles is Dedrin Senat. Now, he's a curious case in and of himself. I wish I could be a fly on the wall up in Flowery Branch of why he is not getting more playing time. We have seen he is definitely lobbying for some more playing time. We've seen workout videos coming out, 2 or 3 of them, on social media, whether it's him working on his footwork or it's him, hanging and getting beat about the abs with a medicine ball, so he's definitely trying to send the signal that he is ready for a bigger role. And I really think that he could. I mean, he showed some flashes in college of being a penetrating defensive tackle. So I think if he shows the coaches that he has whatever they thought he was lacking, he could definitely crack the roster and be a good surprise this year. Along with Dedrin Senat at the defensive tackle position, you have Jacob Tutorio Mariner. Y'all are going to crucify me on that one. Anyway, you have him who played a good bit in a reserve role in the past few seasons. He's been on the practice squad. He's been on, come in at the tail end of the seasons. So he's a guy that the coaching staff obviously trusts to perform, and when he's been in, he's performed pretty well. So he's a guy that I pencil in as part of the defensive line rotation. Now, here's where it kind of gets interesting. At the defensive end position, you have Charles Harris, Stephen Means, and Austin Larkin. Now, Austin Larkin broke the roster last year when Takk McKinley got hurt, and he did okay. So, but Charles Harris, depending on what he does when he gets here, he could really, I know y'all are going to look at me like I'm absolutely crazy, but he could push Takk McKinley for playing time. I mean, we're not 100% sure how Tack's shoulders are rehabbing, and also where he's at headspace-wise. So, signing Charles Harris was a low-risk, high-reward signing. I mean, you're paying the guy less than $2 million, and you gave up a 7th-round pick. Now, this guy's coming in with a chip on his shoulder. The team that drafted him traded him away, and so that always, gives somebody extra motivation, right? And this scheme probably would fit him a little bit better because it's a coaching staff that knows what they want. And I'm not saying that the Dolphins didn't, but he had a lot of turnover, and so I'm always real skeptical about when a guy flames out of a team that has a lot of churning on the coaching staff and stuff like that. So it would be really interesting to see what he provides when he gets, to the team. Along with him, you have Stephen Means. They thought enough of Stephen Means to bring him back. Only saw limited playing time, not last year, but the year before, only the back half of the season. But they thought enough of him then to re-sign him, and then he promptly tore his Achilles, I believe it was. And they thought enough of him to sign him again, right? So they're interesting depth pieces that could push for playing time. But one thing that I'm really interested in is the fact that it doesn't seem like the Falcons are taking that 6-2 that they finished with and going, okay, we were good. Because they didn't re-sign Adrian Claiborne, they didn't re-sign Jack Crawford, they didn't re-sign Devondre Campbell, and they didn't re-sign Vic Beasley. So it's not like they were just sitting there and thinking that they were absolutely good and going to run it back like we, accused them of in the early part of the offseason. They have since and went and added some interesting pieces. Now, it may not pan out. None of this may pan out, right? We could all be looking at a whole new team and a whole new coaching staff, but going into the 2020 season, I am glad to see that the team didn't rest on its laurels. I mean, they went out and signed, former first-rounder Dante Fowler. They traded for former first-rounder Charles Harris. Today, they signed former first-rounder Deion Buchanan. You see what I'm getting at here? They're doing things that I see other teams attempt to do, other winning organizations attempt to do, and that's reclaim cast-offs. That's something that the Patriots are known for like crazy. Same thing with organizations, I think the Steelers do that quite a bit as well. So I'm really interested to see how that works out for us. I mean, you've had Steve Weiss from the NFL Network allude to that we might be doing a little bit of a scheme shift, which I think already started to happen at the end of last season. I really feel like that we started to shift more towards a Tampa 2, which isn't much different than what we were running before the crazy 5-2 formation that Dan Quinn tried to roll out. I mean, a Tampa 2 is just the coverage scheme on the back end of a 4-3. And typically in Tampa 2, you run a 4-3 under, which is what Dan Quinn wanted to run initially when he got here, was a 4-3 under. He just wanted it with a cover 3 shell on the back end. So anyway, like I said, I'm going to revert you back to Toby. He did a real good job on talking about the secondary, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on that. I want to mainly focus on this defensive end. So thinking about Raheem Morris and his experience, really, y'all gonna think I got out over my skis or whatever, but really made me think that, man, Grady Jarrett could be our Warren Sapp. He could be that double-digit defensive tackle guy. Like I said, he got real close last year, and he seems to only be getting hungrier. I know it's crazy to try to be comparing somebody to a Hall of Famer, but I really think that Grady Jarrett has that potential to be an absolute game wrecker. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this defensive line and this defensive line rotation comes together in 2020, because we've got some very interesting pieces that could really make some noise. And honestly, like I said, really push for some playing time. Between Charles Harris and Deon Buchanan, you're talking about 2 former first rounders that could really push for some playing time. I mean, this could speak to, potentially not re-signing Keanu Neal at the end of the season. If Deon Buchanan can come in and play that hybrid role that it seems like that they may want Keanu Neal to play, but do it and be healthy, man, that could be big. That could be real interesting. But that's what I got for you. Just some real excitement on the defensive line, on what I think it could be this year. I was going to hit you with a ton of stats and a ton of video breakdown, but there really wasn't much of what I wanted to express. I felt like me just talking to you was a better way to express it. But anyway, appreciate your time. As always, y'all can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Grim1128. That's GRIMM1128. You can follow Toby D at TobyD1991. Like, share, subscribe, all that good fun stuff. And as always, Falcons fans, rise up.